Hi, my name is Dave Myers, and we are going to talk about burn pits. I am honored to be back here at Missouri, where we've, I guess, been working together off and on for, what, about 4 years, 4 years now? And you folks are near and dear to my heart, so it's always good to get back. I'm a Vietnam vet, rode an aircraft carrier off the coast of Vietnam, and I'm a blue water sailor who is, at least at the moment, still relatively healthy. So we are watching that legislation carefully, however. I have the honor today to moderate this panel. To the far left is Dr. Greg Beer. Dr. Beer is the Associate Teaching Professor and Director of Entrepreneurship Alliance here at the University of Missouri, Robert Trelaskey Senior College of Business. And as you are about to hear, he is a veteran of the United States Army, a St. Louis native, lifelong Cardinal fan, and he's old enough like me to remember the football Cardinals, such as they were. In the days of his youth, he earned his parachute badge by jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. And among his other laurels, he was a trainer for landmines and explosives. So he was still smart enough to come back and survived all that to get his PhD here at Missouri. During the first Gulf War, he served with the 18th Airborne and the 24th Infantry Division in what is referred to as the greatest cavalry charge in history. To his right is a dear friend, and I have to say longtime friend now. I've reached that age where I've known everybody a long time. Amy Krakowski. Amy has a veterans law practice over in Iowa City, and she is also an adjunct professor at the University of Iowa College of Law. Much of our relationship involves her absolutely superb mentoring to our volunteer attorneys through the Veterans Consortium Pro Bono program. She clerked for Judge Mary Sholin, and is are you still the chair for the Rules Advisory Committee? So if you get any rules at the court you don't like, she's the person you call.
Let me know.
And she does a lot of training, including the National Association of County Veteran Service Officers. I am not going to take much more of your time other than to provide a background on the history of burn pits. Now, I say this as a Vietnam vet. I think some of this language was lifted from documents created during the Vietnam War. They took out the word Agent Orange and put in the words burn pits. But I'll just give you a quick lift here. The information can be found in the Tampa Bay Times article of about 2 weeks ago. Burn pits were created to dispose of solid waste in places where alternatives were difficult. In Afghanistan, and I think Dr. Beer will talk about some earlier ones. In 2006, hold your breath, an Air Force memo on burn pit at Balad Air Base in Iraq said smoke from the pit caused health problems, and the commanders knew it. In 2009, CENTCOM issued its first guidelines. Now there's a company here called KBR. They're sort of the, I'll call them the bad guys, but I don't want to get sued. They were involved in providing incinerators, and they didn't do a very good job in running the burn pits, which I guess in some cases involved pouring a lot of JP8 onto a pile of stuff and throwing in a match, or perhaps using one of those little lighter things you use for grills. A lawsuit alleging wrongful death was filed in 2010, and then the State University of New York released a study showing that troops deployed to Iraq suffered new onset acute respiratory illnesses at the rate about twice that of troops who were not deployed. The Government Accountability Office found that operators of the burn pits visited by inspectors were not following guidelines. That gets us to May of 2011. Gee, that's a surprise. May of 2011, Pentagon spokesman said several studies, now this is the Pentagon, said that burn pits provide no indication at this time of a population-wide basis that burn pit smoke results in any long-term health care risk for smoke-expressed individuals. These words sound kind of familiar. And the Pentagon reported that there were 78 burn pits operating in May of 2011. In January 2013, Congress ordered the VA to establish a registry of veterans who may have been exposed in Iraq or Afghanistan. As of about a month ago, there were 120,000 names on that registry. A special Inspector General's report on Afghanistan in 2015 reported that $20 million worth of incinerators at 4 U.S. bases in Afghanistan were never used. There is legislation pending submitted by Amy Klobuchar, Democrat from Minnesota, which introduces the Helping Veterans Exposed to Burn Pits Act. I don't know what the status of that legislation is. It's probably out there stuck someplace. But in any event, it is without further ado and my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Greg Beer.
Thanks for the welcome. Thanks, David. Thanks, Amy. Really, my goal right now is to kind of lay out for you a soldier's perspective on burn pits, why they exist, and what actually gets tossed in there. So let me kind of lay that groundwork by telling a personal story. So I was a young 27-year-old captain, part of the 24th Infantry at Fort Stewart, and we'd been training in desert warfare for years. And we were the first heavy division deployed to Iraq, or to Saudi Arabia, actually, after Iraq invaded Kuwait. And we were pretty well trained. Keep in mind, the military at that point in time had not really deployed a heavy force that quickly in a long, long time, probably half a century. And here we are trying to move 1,600 tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, halfway around the world with practically no notice. In reality, talking about desert training, we were pulled out of the Mojave Desert in California, loaded on ships and sent over to the Persian Gulf. So we just moved from one desert to the next. This is where we went. There's nothing there. For those of you that haven't been downrange before, that's a 1 to 50,000 scale map of Saudi Arabia. There's no hotels, there's no roads, there's nothing. There's no shelter. There's no fuel stations for diesel, for tanks or Bradleys. There's no air conditioning. It's August in Saudi Arabia. It's 120 degrees. It's very pleasant. And there's no air conditioning, no cable TV. So the Air Force didn't exactly deploy with us. You don't see a holiday, no offense, no Holiday Inns, no air conditioning, so. No golf course, but we lived here, you know, moving around to different places in the desert really for a total of 6 or 7 months. And that meant, though, that everything that was shipped over to us to supply all of those soldiers, Marines, even the airmen, everything had to be shipped to us. Water bottles, there's no water lines, there's no plumbing. Fuel, diesel, JP4, 30 weight, you name it. All of those lubricants had to be shipped over to us, medical supplies, food, spare parts, batteries, tires, construction material, barrier material, and periodically a care package from home. Here's the problem. All that stuff has packaging, and all that stuff has residue. So we've got these waste products to deal with, the plastic, the tin, the heavy metals, the waste oil cans, the spare tires, the old batteries, medical supplies, ammunition casings, again, metals. Everything had to be disposed of. and there's no trash service. So what do you do? Because part of the problem is that when we deployed during the first Gulf War in the 90s, we're in a fundamentalist Muslim country, and we have to be invisible to the population. The kingdom didn't want a huge military footprint in their country because what we're doing was kind of unusual at the time. So there's no trash service. We're pushed out into the middle of the desert. We're the guest of Saudi Arabia, trying to maintain pretty much an invisible footprint. So large-scale littering, just leaving things behind, is not an option. So we had a lot of armored bulldozers and things like that, so we just started pushing up berms and making what would become a burn pit. And what went in there? Everything. Everything. And where my unit was at, most of our burning had to be done during the night so that we didn't leave a big signature, a big smoke plume. But in the morning when the sun would come up, this is what you'd see. It's just a constant haze and particulate everywhere. We didn't know. And I don't think anybody really knew at the time. We're starting to figure the problems out decades later, though. Okay? So that's kind of why burn pits came into existence. And now I'm going to turn it over to Amy to kind of talk about, through some of the more, drill down into the weeds, some of the more details about the burn pits and training letters associated with those from the VA. Amy?
Thank you. So my portion of the presentation, I'm really going to focus on the challenges that are being faced by people who are trying to establish entitlement to service connection for primarily respiratory conditions that are related to exposure to the burn pits. And these are, I have several case studies that I'd like to go through, but I'm going to start out talking about VA's training letter, 1003. And I've provided a copy of this to Angela, and so it's on the program. Okay, it's on the website. I've got my little dog-eared copy of it here in case anyone wants to touch it. It is, if you want to take a look while we can all sing along, please feel free, but I need that back. So, it goes through the burn pits in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Djibouti. That's just one section of the training letter. This training letter is all about environmental hazards and in these different areas. What we're going to focus on here is on the burn pits. And these are not, unfortunately, these are not presumptives yet. There are no presumptions, there are no legal presumptions related to burn pit exposure. But also Afghanistan, for purposes of the training letter, Afghanistan is in the region. So that's one thing that's good to know. The training letter covers all these. Obviously, Camp Lejeune, you don't have to worry about that anymore. But the burn pits and really what you were talking about with the particulate matter, that shows up in really a lot with people who come back with respiratory conditions. So the training letter, it's a good idea to get a sense of the way it's structured. It's basically in these three sections. It starts out with a description of all the different environmental hazard incidents, and then it goes through the claim processing procedures and policies that the VA adjudicators have to follow. And then one of my favorite sections here are the fact sheets for examiners, and the reason it's my favorite section is because these are the fact sheets that are given to C&P examiners when they're looking at claims for different disorders related to burn pit exposures, but these are also fact sheets that you can use to give to your veteran to take to his or her doctor to look at and give them a little bit of background information on what the person was exposed to. So the burn pit at Joint Base Balad, in the training letter it talks about, came out of this study that was done at the giant burn pit at Joint Base Balad. It covered 10 acres. They were going through 2 tons of waste each day, and this is what was being burned at Joint Base Balad and at burn pits all over the region in Iraq, Afghanistan, Djibouti. The air sampling that they tested in joint base Balad, and this was in 2007, this is what it detected: particulate matter. And if you look at the training letter, it sort of breaks down all these different ingredients. And for some of you, it lists dioxins. And take a look at that. And who's a regulation geek like I am? Any regulatory? There's another regulation geek in the room. Thank you. Does this look familiar to anybody? Hell yeah. I mean, if you're not saying hell yeah, you should be saying hell yeah. What is this? All together now. Yes, indeed. That's right there in the training letter. So these toxins, all the toxins that are identified in the training letter as coming up and showing up in the sampling of the burn pits, they affect the respiratory, they affect the skin, the eyes, they affect all these different systems. Most of what I've seen in my personal practice are respiratory cases, but just so you know, they can affect these other systems, and this makes sense because you're breathing it, it is landing on your skin, it is landing on your food that you are then eating, so it makes a lot of sense that it would affect these other systems. So the group before us, the panel before, went through the elements that you need to show in order to establish entitlement to service connection. The basic elements are you've got to show a current condition, an in-service event, and a nexus between the two. And because these are not presumptives, you still have to show that nexus element. So for a claim related to a burn pit exposure, really for the initial claim, what a veteran needs to send in is the veteran has to identify the condition or the symptom or a number of symptoms, and these are symptoms that a veteran is absolutely competent to identify. The veteran also has to give information about the exposure event, and just having that sent in, according to the training letter, requires VA to then review for potential exposure. Now, in order for evidence to trigger VA's duty to obtain a medical exam, it doesn't take much. In any situation, it really does not take much. There's a case called McClendon that says in order for VA to get a medical exam, you just have to show evidence of a current condition, an in-service event, an indication that there may be an association. These are really loosey-goosey terms, right? An indication that there may be an association between the current condition and an in-service event, and not enough medical evidence to make a decision. So in the training letter, it sort of spells out evidence that you need that will trigger VA's duty to get a medical exam, and it's even, to me, it reads like almost even lower than the McClendon low threshold, because you just have to have, no diagnosis is required, and there's no diagnosis generally. You just have to have a current condition, but the claimant has to describe persistent or recurrent symptoms, and it does expressly state that claimants are competent to describe these sorts of symptoms. For the in-service event, the DD-214 is generally enough. If the DD-214 shows service in the region, that's generally enough. Why? Because a few slides back, you saw how big these burn pits are. And so there's a general concession that if you were there, you were exposed in some way to the residuals of the burn pits. The veteran statement, of course, is enough. You don't have to show that you were working the burn pit. That is not required. That's not required. You just need to show that you were exposed, right? So the veteran statement's enough as long as it's consistent with the facts, places, and circumstances of service. That's 1154. If and it actually says in the training letter as well. This is not me looking at this whole situation with my usual rose-tinted glasses. this is just coming straight out of the training letter. If they require proof of actual exposure, that is potentially a violation of 1154A, which basically says the above. It says in the training letter, exposure is easily conceded. It's easily conceded. So the in-service event element, if you have just any evidence that the veteran was there, was in that region, easily conceded. And here, it can be on the DD-214, post-deployment health assessment, the post-deployment reassessment. These are good documents to look at because they will have a box to check. Were you exposed to the burn pits or smoke or dust? They have different boxes to check. These documents are really important for National Guard and reservists because they don't get really comprehensive separation exams, so it's really a good idea to get familiar, to know what these look like in the Veterans Claims File, and look for those to help if you need to establish exposure, but it doesn't take a lot. Here's language from the training letter too. Nexus doesn't really take a lot as long as there's evidence. If the existing evidence is enough to decide the claim, you don't even need a medical exam. You don't need a medical exam. That's language from the training letter. What should you do? Get a medical exam. Get a medical opinion, if you can. Here's some medical treatise evidence, and I've listed it here. I can send you, I think I sent you this one, maybe, the New England Journal of Medicine article. There's several articles out that are really helpful, particularly if you're going to provide information to your own doctor to get a favorable medical opinion. This is one. The IOM has an interesting report on this. There was an Iowa study as well that's actually called the Iowa study that is useful for this too. So here's the case study. I'm just going to start going into the case studies now, and these are the claims that I've worked on with people who were exposed to the burn pits. And so the first one here is a 26-year-old veteran. He served at Joint Base Balad. He's diagnosed with constrictive bronchiolitis, which is a really, really, really rare condition. And you're seeing a lot of constrictive bronchiolitis diagnoses in this cohort of veterans. Before he went over to Iraq, he was a high school athlete. He never smoked. And then he comes back, he has shortness of breath, he can't really exercise. When he tries to go for a run, this was a kid who was a runner, when he tries to go for a run, he throws up afterwards. But his PFTs, his pulmonary function test results, are normal. And so if you know anything about how VA rates these conditions, respiratory conditions are pretty much rated based on the results of pulmonary function tests. And his looked pretty decent. So he went and got a favorable medical opinion from his treating VA pulmonologist. And it wasn't incredibly detailed, but it did have some rationale. It basically said, high school athlete, never smoked. There's no other reason for him to have this. He doesn't smoke now. So it was a favorable opinion. In response to that, even though VA's training letter said that you can concede nexus if the evidence is sufficient to grant, and the evidence, in my opinion, was sufficient to grant, just at this point, VA did go and get a CMP opinion from an osteopath who said, my very favorite phrase, it is resorting to mere speculation to say that his current constrictive bronchiolitis is related to his exposure to the burn pits, and based on that CMP opinion, the regional office denied. So we go back and we get a really detailed nexus opinion from the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics professor of pulmonology, who just so happens to be the chief pulmonologist at the VA Medical Center. We're very fortunate in Iowa City in that we've got a VA Medical Center right there in Iowa City, and the VA Medical Center and the hospital exchange. They trade doctors. They work together, and so this gentleman, God bless him, he teaches this at the U, and he's VA's chief pulmonologist, and he wrote a beautiful 2-page letter. And I also submitted a written argument that is just citing just language from the training letter. And so we got him service connected, and this is what comes up. So you win. You say, "Yay, we won," and then you've got to deal with the ratings. And so you recall I told you that VA rates conditions based on the pulmonary function test results. So what do you do with these guys? I mean, he is throwing up if he tries to go for a run. He gets winded just walking up a flight of stairs. This is a 26-year-old. I mean, he's 26 years old, a high school athlete, and he's not going to get, more than 10%. Whoops. Yeah, this is a fun meme, isn't it? Come on. Okay, so I did go through this. The conditions are rated based on the PFTs. This is from 4.96, which sort of gives some guidance on how to rate these conditions. And it says that you're supposed to use the pulmonary function test results unless they're not going to be a decent, valid indicator of what's really going on. The training letter provides useful information here in terms of rating these conditions, because the training letter itself actually recognizes that these soldiers, these veterans, will have normal or near normal pulmonary function tests. So the training letter itself actually directs raters to think outside the box with these cases. It says to look at alternate diagnostic codes and consider extra scheduler, especially if there's information in there about employment being affected. Okay, so extra scheduler is, it was noted in the earlier presentation that veterans are rated based on VA's rating schedule, Part 38 CFR Part 4. And they're rated on, from 0 to 100% in 10% increments. If you've got a situation where the rating schedule is really not adequately reflecting the veteran's condition, they can ask VA to consider, to think outside the box and to give a higher rating just based on additional, if there's frequent hospitalizations, effect on employment. There are different criteria they can look at, but it's basically saying, the rating schedule, the rating schedule just doesn't, it can't possibly contemplate every scenario. And so if it does not adequately reflect what's really going on with the veteran, VA can and should consider giving a higher rating on an extra scheduler basis. And the training letter actually directs raters to do this. Okay, so case study number 2. This is a different gentleman. This veteran, he's National Guard veteran. He was, when he got to me, he was already service connected for sleep apnea. We got him service connected for the lung mycosis related to burn pit exposure, but they rated him 50% based on the use of the CPAP machine, and that was based on the sleep apnea. The regulation says that it lists certain diagnostic codes that you can't. There's the rule against pyramiding. You can't rate someone twice for a condition that has similar, the same sorts of symptoms. They can't get a double rating. So in a situation like this, where he's got 2 conditions that are both respiratory conditions, that the diagnostic code is listed in 4.96, they've got to give him the higher rating. And so they gave him just the rating for sleep apnea. If he was rated just for the lung mycosis, just based on his PFT result, he would only be getting 30%. So that was nice. They're giving him the higher 50% rating. But before he went into service, he had management positions in retail. And now, after he got out of service, The only work he could get is stocking shelves at the Walmart because of his incessant coughing. And I can't tell you, I had a hearing with this gentleman, and it would break your heart. I mean, he cannot get through a sentence without coughing. And like a barking, hacking cough that doesn't stop. He'll get 3 words out and have a coughing fit. 3 more words and have a coughing fit. 3 more words and having and it is, and so people don't want to be around that. They think, you know, he's got tuberculosis or something. They don't want to be around that. So this is the only type of work that he can get. So the training letter gives us arguments for a higher rating. That when they rated the condition based on the sleep apnea, they didn't consider extra scheduler, they didn't consider employment, they didn't consider secondary conditions, and this is also something to really keep in mind, respiratory issues. In this gentleman's case, he was up all night coughing, so it really affected his sleep. Headaches, there were mental health issues. We had a conversation with his wife. Their relationship suffered because of this. His ability to play with his children was suffering because of this condition. He was very, very depressed. So there were all sorts of secondary conditions that came out that we were able to get VA to consider and appropriately rate. The third and the final case study that I'll go through is, it was probably one of the more heartbreaking situations I've seen. This was an Army veteran with a good deal of service. He served 3 tours in Iraq, 1 tour in Afghanistan, and he got out in 2011. And in 2016, at the age of 41, he's diagnosed with multiple myeloma and amyloidosis. And where's my, okay, you're the regulatory geek in the room, so where have we seen multiple myeloma and amyloidosis? Hello? Yeah, that would be in dealing with Agent Orange presumptions. Agent Orange presumptions. They also show up in the presumptive list for chronic conditions in 38 CFR 3.309 sub A. But yes, in 3.307 and 3.309 sub E, they're listed. These are presumptive if you're exposed to Agent Orange. So when he filed his claim for service connection, he sends in a letter with his VA oncologist saying that it's related to his exposure to diesel fumes, and the CMP examiner says it's not likely because he's black. So that was essentially the reason. It's not likely because he's African American, and there's no service medical record showing. Well, he didn't have this in service, and the regional office denied. We send in a written legal argument based on the information from the training letter. The regional office acknowledges the legal argument. They get another negative CMP opinion citing additional, multiple risk factors. He's a guy, he's old, he was 41. He was 41 years old at the time. And he's still black, so that's a problem. And there's no environmental risk factors have been identified. So at that point, you can imagine my head just flew right off my body when I saw that line in the, and even though I cited the training letter. And so we get this up to the board, believe it or not, and we get a favorable medical nexus opinion. This one completed by a wonderful doctor at the University of Iowa who runs their multiple myeloma program. And so when this gentleman, when the veteran was diagnosed, the VA in Iowa City didn't have a multiple myeloma program that could deal with the severity of his condition, so they wanted to send him to Tennessee. Meanwhile, we have in Iowa City this fabulous multiple myeloma program at the university, so he goes over there. And we get a letter from the director of the multiple myeloma program, who actually, it was very interesting because he would not have provided such a thorough opinion had this veteran been immediately diagnosed, like within 1 year, if this had been a chronic condition, this doctor would not have said it was related to his exposure in service. But because of the length of time, it apparently takes a good deal of time following exposure to the dioxin to develop multiple myeloma. So this was part of his opinion, and then he added, he had to go and throw the credentials around there, which we loved. And he said it's greater than a 50% probability that he developed it in service as a direct consequence of exposure to dioxin. So now we've got this. This isn't just in his letter. This isn't a board decision. The board, and I'm giving you the docket number if you want to print this out and show it to your doctor to help you get a medical opinion, because sometimes doctors like to see that another doctor said so. And so we've got, in this decision, the board is quoting the director of Iowa's multiple myeloma program with his 25 years of experience and saying that the veteran has multiple myeloma as a result of his military service. And they did secondary, the amyloidosis came out of the multiple myeloma. So the summary here, just to wrap things up, is to really understand, moving ahead to helping veterans establish entitlement to service connection for particularly respiratory conditions related to burn pit exposure. Really understand what's in the training letter. You don't have to have it memorized. You're going to have it available to you, but there's great language in that training letter for you to use that can really help substantiate these claims. Just know that the claim has to identify symptoms. You don't need to go in with a diagnosis. He will need to eventually get some sort of a diagnosis, but this isn't this isn't one of the Gulf War presumptives. So but you can just identify the symptoms. The claimant has to describe the exposure events. You're going to want to send in good medical nexus opinion. There's tons of supporting medical treatise evidence. And when they're looking at ratings, get them to think outside the box. And that's in the training letter. Whoops. Whoops, 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 whoops. Okay, and that's it for me. Yeah.
Now let me take a minute to kind of broaden the subject beyond burn pits to the totality, really, of toxic wounds in general. So back to the Gulf War. It's early January 1991. As most of you remember, that's a long time ago, 26 years ago, almost 27 years ago, but diplomacy failed. Real quickly, let me kind of summarize the 24th Infantry Division again, because I think it's important that you understand each individual vet's case is a little different in what they did, what their military occupational specialty was, because it helps paint a picture of what they might have been exposed to. So here's the 24th Infantry Division. Here's Kuwait. I never stepped foot even close to Kuwait. And the entire 24th Infantry Division, actually nobody in the 18th Airborne Corps went in Kuwait. What that actually meant, Saddam Hussein actually pulled a lot of his chemical weapons, because that's where we're going now. He pulled a lot of his chemical weapons out of Kuwait because he expected to basically get his ass kicked here. And he pulled some of those back into Iraq. So the 24th Infantry Division moved. We were kind of the left hook, and we traveled pretty far pretty quickly, which was phenomenal. David mentioned the world's greatest cavalry charge earlier, and that's actually what it was. 370 kilometers in 100 hours with tanks, Bradleys, and all the support equipment to do that. It was phenomenal. So, but again, we were pretty well trained and hard charged, and we were ready to do anything. We were ready to fight, and that was our charge, was to close with and destroy the enemy. What that actually meant, though, was that we fully expected to have to fight through a chemical environment because we were going into Iraq, not Kuwait. And there were going to be chemical weapons and ammunition supply points along our route. We kind of knew that going into it. 5 specifically. 5 different areas where we kind of expected to find chemical weapons. And the problem is, with a country like Iraq that purchases weapons from all over the world, there's no standardized markings. So for the American forces that were going to have to kind of maneuver through some of these areas, we really didn't know when we found ammunition what was a chemical weapon and what was a conventional weapon. And that's going to create a bit of a problem. The way the United States and most developed countries, the way we store weapons, we segment chemical weapons and conventional weapons. Iraq didn't really do that. All of the ammunition was kind of just commingled, so we didn't know what was what. But again, the 24th ID's mission was to close with and destroy the enemy, not necessarily destroy ammunition. So if there were no bad guys there to bring harm upon, we'd keep moving. But with any tip of the spear, there's always follow-on units that kind of need to clean things up that we left behind, things that we bypassed. So a lot of units behind us, the 82nd Airborne and some other units, started moving in to destroy things like power lines, train stations, ammunition supply points. And you can see it's a pretty dirty environment. And later on, we find out that there's chemical weapons mixed in there. Dust like you cannot imagine. I was thinking about this the other day and going back through these slides. This is I got shipped a brand new Humvee over there. This is green. It's actually a green Humvee. That's how bad the dust is. And we have been driving through all kinds of particulate matter. We had spent 6 or 7 months around burn pits. Now we're in Iraq. Things are blowing up around us. It's a dirty, messy environment. Looking pretty dirty there. It's been a while since I had a shower. Normally we used a 5-gallon bucket anyway. This is my driver, Smitty. He's a black guy. Doesn't really look African American there. It's extremely dirty. You run into these just like talcum powder bowls. You'll be going 40 miles an hour just screaming through the desert, and all of a sudden you'll be where your visibility is 0. We actually had an accident. We ran into a car not a car, but a truck that way. We couldn't see where we were going. Everything just gets stirred up. So to bring it home to my case, and I'm kind of laying the groundwork here for Chris with toxic wounds in general. My challenge with the VA is that I stayed on active duty once I came home from Desert Storm for about another 5 years. And once I left active duty, I went immediately into the VA's healthcare system. All of my medical records for 20 years since I left active duty have been at the VA. All of these problems that we discussed this morning are in my medical records. And I went back to file an updated claim because I was, like we were talking about this morning, I was kind of tired of sucking it up and moving on because I knew how I felt. My family knew how I felt, so I filed a claim. And many of the claims that I filed for were these undiagnosed illnesses. They were the presumptive issues. Denied, 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 denied. Had a 100% batting record. And that's when I actually turned to Angela. And I can't thank her enough because I'm a fairly educated guy. I got a PhD in engineering, but I can't figure any of this crap out. That's why I truly appreciate your advocacy for our veterans. We don't understand all of the things that you're trying to do. I understand how I feel, and I kind of understand the nexus of connecting things. But when you look at my unit and my MOS, I was even denied for ringing in my ears. I'm a 21 Bravo, a combat engineer. If you look at the VA's list, I have a high likelihood of hearing loss. Denied. Seriously? I wasn't on active duty for a year. It was about 10 years and then some more time after 9/11. Okay? So in addition, with the Gulf War, my unit, we were expecting to fight in a chemical environment, so we were prescribed the polybromide pills, which is a low-dose nerve agent, so that when we did have to inject ourselves with the atropine, it would be more effective. Dust palliative, we talked about a little bit this morning, and you know, this dust is just completely unbelievable. So if we were going to be bivouacked in an area for a little while, our answer was to just take these water trucks with the big hoses across the back and just pour diesel all over the ground. So all of our routes were just covered in diesel. kept the dust down. It's kind of stunk. Be careful where you smoke. Okay. And again, there was a massive blast at a place called Camisea, ammunition supply point, and that's where chemical weapons really come into play. So I'm going to kind of pause there and take questions, David, and that'll kind of lead us into Chris here.
While Amy and Greg gets settled, a couple of quick things. I commend to you the Gulf War newsletter. It's a VA publication with all sorts of up-to-date information about studies, presumptives, and that sort of thing. It is very helpful. A quick Amy story. I'm in Ohio, talking to the Ohio folks, and I'm with the president of the State Service Officers Association. I'm leaning on a garbage can on a city street in Columbus. Angela has set up a meeting with the three of us, and after it's over, Amy starts talking to Nicole, the service officer, and she mentions Balad. Well, Nicole had a client who had served in Afghanistan, and she can't figure out where this program. And Amy says, Joint Base Balad. Nicole goes, my guy has mentioned that. Claim got revised, and we're hopeful for a thumbs up. And my last personal thought before we do the questions, history is spelled History. When you file that initial claim, tell your guy's story. Doesn't matter if it's this, if it's a cook at an air base in Vietnam whose claim was denied because he was a cook, even though that base was mortared 14 times during his tour there. Give the rating officer the story, the history of what that individual. It may take an extra couple of days to get that buddy statement, but fill in the background. Don't let them think. I heard a story out of Chicago where a new raider said she denied the claim because she had never heard of a place called Iwajima, which is IWO space JIMA. Young people, they may not be familiar with history. They may not be familiar with all those little towns and wide spots in the road in Iraq and Afghanistan. Make it easy for them. And that's my crusade. Okay, questions? Oh, come on. No questions?
I have one.
Okay.
Are any of you aware, has there been any work about secondary effects on children of veterans? I was reading a little bit about a higher rate of birth defects among children from veterans.
Not from this war. Of course, Agent Orange is going to be with us for generations. But
My Gulf War baby's up here. She's pretty normal. She's in medical school, though, and she has fun because she knows what my issues are. And that's why, I mean, she is my support system and my wife. So she's normal, but she's been a huge asset to me to kind of bounce ideas around her. She explains terminology to me. Between Angela and my daughter, they kind of explain it to me.
nothing like impassioned children. Yes.
Hi, my question is for Amy. Amy, do you think that chronic bronchiolitis could be considered a monkey related to normal PFTs?
It could be. It could be. Yeah, it's constrictive bronchiolitis.
Yeah, are there any, is there anything that needs like on an X-ray or anything?
It's diagnosed via a wedge biopsy. So I guess it couldn't be medically unexplained. So I think once you have the diagnosis, I mean, it's obvious it's not an undiagnosed, but could it be a MUCNI? You know what, I don't know exactly, but I know that they look at the biopsy and they say, I don't know what it looks like. Dr. Beer? Dr. Beer, would you help us? but it's a they get the biopsy and they say, yeah, it's constrictive bronchiolitis. I don't know what it looks like. Dr. Beard?
Scarring around bronchi. Well, there's been a lot of inflammation for a long time.
Okay.
And then probably not.
Probably not.
Both of
See
you,
the doctor.
regular interview, you did an example of a claim which looks like that about credibility. Is that pretty common to do something like this? I assume you're going through a appeal process.
Well, it's kind of funny with mine in particular is like, I have discussed all of these things with my VA doctor for a decade, but there's not a diagnosis like we were talking this morning. And that creates the problem. What was really frustrating about mine is that when they sent me to do my CNP exam, the only thing they had me examined for again was respiratory issues again. So I had claimed ringing in my ears and all these other things. They weren't even part of the evaluation. So I went in there and was done with the nurse practitioner in 10 minutes. I said, okay, let's do the rest of these things now. And she said, they're not even on my schedule. So it was literally just denied. And I think that was kind of a fluke. I hope that's not the norm at the VA.
Sorry. It happens more.
I only see denials. So that's all I see, and so I don't want I think VA gets it right a lot of the time. I just don't see those cases. I see these cases.
Last call.
When they want to visit, you know, first they went through a process to be researching their opinion. You can find out similar ratings with particular diseases, particular treatments. You go back to them and say, you give me 30%, people are getting 70%, whatever. They review it and say, yes, you're right. You get to do that research to see if this particular condition, these particular medication, biologics, whatever, these people are getting a higher rating all the time. Why didn't I get it? Oh, you're right, you should get it. If you didn't do that research, of course, it's turning you. A lot of individuals don't have the ability, as you said. You're an educated guy, this stuff kind of complicated.
You can't do it without these people.
Up.
Very I seem to remember going to another conference where somebody told me about just the very fact you were in that part of the world where diseases are not common in the United States. And that particular error caused these diseases.
Yeah, and a lot of that is in the training letter. I mean, that a lot of that's in the training letter, and then a lot of that is also in 3.317 with the list of the diseases of the infectious diseases that are typical to that area. It's not that respiratory conditions like constrictive bronchiolitis are endemic to that region. If you had a burn pit the size of the one that was a joint base Balad in the middle of Columbia, Missouri, you would be getting constrictive bronchiolitis here. So it's not necessarily that these types of issues that are related to the environmental hazards that are discussed in the training letter, they're not necessarily tied to this area. But yes, the VA will easily concede the exposure event just by virtue of the fact that you were in Iraq, Afghanistan, Djibouti. They will concede it. But I don't think it's because those are endemic to that region. It's more of it's about the exposure to the hazard.
Dr. Weir, anything?
Nothing to ask.
There was another one. I am not aware of anything other than the KBR, which I think was actually that was dismissed. Yeah. So right now, I don't believe there's anything pending.
Oh, it is on appeal? Oh,
Say what's that?
it's on appeal.
It's on appeal. So KBR was supposed to provide the incinerators and the destruction in the burn pits safely. They didn't quite get it done. Anything else?
One question. A 26-year-old client was a runner, is a runner, wants to be a runner. Is there any correlation, I wonder if the VA made a pretty significant correlation between these kinds of illnesses and the fact that there were jogging paths in all of those locations mentioned. Runners are out there, jogging paths and burn pits.
Yeah, and that, but again, because, given the size of these burn pits, and the big ones are gone now. The joint-based Balad, the pit there, that huge one, that's been shut down. But still, they're still using this technology to get rid of waste. But yeah, I mean, my guy he ran past the burn pit, and that didn't, it shouldn't even factor in, because if he had just stepped foot into Iraq, into joint-based Balad, he didn't have to, and we didn't have to show that, but yeah, he did. And there's certainly a lot of people who were able to say, yeah, we ran past this, we were in that area, or we were close to it, so yeah, that is relevant, or it can be. But it's not going to exclude, they're not going to deny that you were exposed if you didn't have that type of, immediate relationship to the burn pit.
I've heard that before. Subjective to an outbreak of the last spring. The primary thing we burned over there, in both of those bases, which were kind of garrison bases, was the object you had in front of you, the water bottles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not this one, this one. Yeah.
And anybody that's been over there knows that if you were a supervisor, you spent half your day telling other people to hydrate.
Yeah.
That's what they were doing.
Yeah.
That's what they were doing.
Thank you. I suspect Angela is standing here for a reason. Amy, Dr. Baer, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.